Howdy, folks. What you just heard there was the intro section to a song that I've been working on, and that's what we see here in my DAW. And sounds okay, but maybe a little sterile, and the guitars are really in your face, and I don't really want to. It is guitar-driven song, but I don't want it to be that guitar-driven, and I just want to add a little more warmth or just a bit more of a sense of space. And one of the best ways to add a sense of space is by using reverb. Now, when we're talking about reverb, there's basically two different types of reverb. One type of reverb is algorithmic reverb, and that uses like mathematical formulas and algorithms to kind of artificially create a sense of space, much in the same way a synthesizer will use algorithms and formulas to create sounds. And the other type of reverb is convolution reverb, and that will take an actual recording of a physical space and then it'll apply that sound of the space to the audio track that you use it on. Now, for this recording, what I want to do is add an algorithmic reverb to my guitar tracks and then add a convolution reverb to the whole song. Now, I'm picking algorithmic reverb for the guitar tracks because any other guitarist, might be familiar with the fact that usually on a guitar amp, there's really just one reverb control knob that usually just kind of controls the balance between the dry and the wet reverb signal, which kind of leads me to believe that most guitar amps probably have, used algorithmic reverb, because I've never seen a guitar amp where you could pick, a large hall or a cathedral or a cave or anything like that. Maybe some of the newer, more fancier amps have that, but I've never seen that. So how we're going to do this is go ahead and right-click on this Guitar 1 track. Go down to my Studio Effects. We have this Ubic A reverb plugin, and here in the middle is where all my tracks and effects are, and right here is the algorithmic reverb. Now, depending on your DAW or the plugins, there's going to be different controls and settings that you can do, but a lot of them are going to have some basic controls. For example, there's always going to be a dry and wet setting. Like when you have it all the way wet, that means it's pretty much just all the reverb. If you got it all the way dry, then you basically don't really have any reverb, and it's just the unaffected audio signal. And another thing you might have is a room shape or room shape and size. And in this one, you can see here says initialize, and there's an early reflection setting. There's a bright room setting, a big venue setting, and just a basic reverb. I'll kind of control the shape or whatever of the reverb. And as you can see here, this early size control, that's going to kind of control the size of the space. So if we have it very small, it's going to be like a small room type space and turn out to a very large space. And there's your pre-delay, which kind of sets up when the reverb is kind of going to start. And here we have the balance between the early reflections and the late reflections on the reverb, which is kind of like the dry and wet setting in that early reflections are going to be the basic signal, and the light reflections are going to be the actual reverb. So let's just, well, let's just hear how this sounds right now. I'll go ahead and solo out my guitar one track and hit. Now that's a little much, so one thing I want to do is adjust the decay, and the decay will kind of control how long the reverb hangs on. So if we turn that down quite a bit, it will not hang on as long as if we had it all the way up. Then so if you have it all the way up like that, as you can hear, it's kind of just going on forever. So I'm going to turn that down quite a bit. I think I'm going to make a smaller room size. And probably going to take down the wet signal a little bit. And kind of in the middle on my early reflections. Let's hear how this sounds. Now that sounds a bit more like the type of reverb that I would put on my actual guitar amp, so I'm pretty happy with that. And I'm going to go ahead and apply that to my second guitar as well. But I'll spare you all them adjustments through the magic of editing. Now let's hear how these sound together. Now I think my guitars sound pretty good. So next what I want to do is add a convolution reverb to the whole song to kind of give it that sense that my, quote-unquote band is playing in an actual physical space. Now, in Reason, probably the best way to do this is right away when you open up Reason here in your effects section, there's this kind of master section, and as monitors, and you have a delay effect here, an echo effect, and a couple different types of convolution reverb. And so I'm gonna go for a room reverb. I'll turn that on. Next I want to go into my channel strip, and right here in the effects section, if you look over, there's that room reverb. I'm going to enable all my tracks with it, and I'm going to turn it up pretty high on all of them. And I'm also over here going to turn up the wet signal all the way up. This is just so I can get a good sense of what the actual reverb is going to sound like. Of course, I'll go back and make adjustments and dial things back later. But let's hear how, and as I said, with convoluted reverb, or convolution reverb, there's always going to be some kind of actual physical space. And here we got an oak room. Well, let's hear how it's going to sound in an oak room here. No, not bad, really, but I'm actually going to choose, like I can go here and browse all the different, spaces that I can go to, and I'm going to pick something that might be a little more, likely where we'd be, where my band would play. I've already kind of looked at a lot of these, and you can see there's, echo room, there's halls and caves, even car interiors. But what I'm going to go for is like a medium stage, I think. Like my band's playing a medium-sized club or venue or whatever. Let's hear how this sounds. I think that'll work, but what I want to do is definitely dial back how much reverb there is, because you don't want to overdo it with any effects, especially reverb, because that can tend to kind of muddy up the sound and make everything bleed together. So take that down. I think I'm also going to take the decay level down a little bit so it don't hang on as long. Now let's hear this. Hmm. I think that'll probably work. Go ahead and give it a listen from the beginning. And I think that sounds pretty good. So that pretty much covers it. So, in summary, like I said, two basic types of reverb, algorithmic and convolution. Algorithmic will create a sense of space using formulas or algorithms. Much in the way a synthesizer uses formulas to create sound. And convolution reverb is an actual recording of a physical space that you can apply to your tracks. And, you know, depending on the plugins or, DAWs that you're using, there's going to be, different controls and settings, but pretty much in convolution and algorithmic, there's always going to be some kind of a dry wet adjustment, usually some kind of decay adjustment, and settings for the shape of a room or size of a room. And also, like I said before, I really want to emphasize that not to overdo it. It's really fun to play with effects and all that, but there's always that temptation to really go overboard. But don't want to the effects to overpower the song. So in the end, it's all about how it sounds and personal taste. But you'll find most of the time, a little bit will do you just fine. So that pretty much wraps it up. Thanks for listening, and rock on, folks.